Welcome to Reading the Bible with Pastor. Today we're on Mark chapter 5, starting at verse 21. We had read about how Jesus had crossed the Sea of Galilee, and there he had calmed the sea and the storm there, and showing that he is the God of creation, that he can even control the elements, and wowed and amazed the disciples. From there, as he crossed the Sea of Galilee, when he arrives, he heals a man that has thousands of demons in him, a legion of demons, and he tells the man to go and tell everyone what the Lord has done for him. So what we see here is the divine miracles that the Lord is able to do, power over creation, power over sin, death, and the devil. In this next section, we're actually going to see how Jesus interacts with us. We're also going to see a little bit more of who he is and his nature, that he is both God and man. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, and that is, he's going from east to west, back to where the crowds were, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came out one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be made well and live." So this ruler of the synagogue, and remember, not all in authority are actually against Jesus, those that feel threatened by him. Jairus knows that this man can heal, and he is doing so by the will of God, and falls at his feet. A ruler of the synagogue falling at the feet of a peasant, if you will, shows that he knows that there is some type of authority in this man, Jesus. As we read in 24, Jesus went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. Now, a woman who has an unstopped discharge of blood is actually ceremoniously unclean in the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament. And what that uncleanliness means is that she is not able to go to the temple to see a sacrifice given for her sake of forgiveness. And she's not supposed to interact with other people. She's supposed to keep her distance. So that unclean state, that ceremoniously unclean state, sets her apart and is differentiated. God uses that as a symbol of what it means to be differentiated from him, his holiness. Our sin makes us unclean in his glory, his holiness, and perfection. He is going to be the one that cleanses us so that we can be in his presence. It's the same way in the Old Testament. You had to be cleaned of your uncleanness. Then you could come into the presence of the temple. And that might look like certain sacrifices or waiting till your illness is over. And in this case, the woman had to wait until her discharge was stopped. A person would want their illness or their uncleanness to be over as soon as possible so that they could be in the presence of their community, of the faithful, and in the temple of their Lord. And we'll see how far this woman goes. And she had suffered under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. So she spent all that she had, and had been to many doctors to try to fix this. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." She knows she's unclean. She knows she's not supposed to be touching people. She takes advantage of the crowd to touch his garments. And in faithfulness, she says, "I know this man is a healer. He does things by the will of God, and I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" This is a great point here. Jesus is both God and man. There is no separating the two. And yet, there are some times where we really see his humanity. Jesus knows his divine power has gone out, but yet he asks, "Who touched my garments?" And yet, at the same time, if somebody were to come up behind me and just touch my jacket or my shirt, I may never even know that somebody touched my clothes. But yet, he knows, and he asks the question, well, who did it? As God, he should know, but as a man, he wouldn't. And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. And again, remember, this is showing his two natures, both God and man. He's looking around to see who had done it, and in his humanity, he doesn't know. In his divinity, he does. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." There's a lot jam-packed into this one line that Jesus says. First off, he says, "You are well." That's that divinity speaking. I know as God that you are made well. And he calls her daughter. You remember previously we had talked about the people around Jesus and who the family of Jesus was, are those that do the will of God, that is, to receive his salvation and tell others about it. He calls her daughter, beckoning her back into God's presence. She has been made clean. She can be in the community of believers. She is a daughter of the Lord. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. There's two things going on here. Be healed of your disease is the earthly temporal ailment that has plagued her is done away with. And then your faith has made you well. Go in peace. You are forgiven. In here, we see that this woman is made clean, able to be amongst the believers. She is part of the family of God, a child of God, daughter. She is healed of her disease, and she is also forgiven of her sins. Here, all in this one line. While Jesus was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." Remember, this woman had feared and believed. And Jesus is reminding the ruler, do exactly as this woman has done. Do not fear, believe. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. Peter, James, and John end up becoming the intimate three around Jesus, the inner three of the 12 disciples. This is the first time that they're drawn out from the 12 disciples apart to go with the Lord for a separate event. They'll do this 2 more times for a total of 3 at the Mount of Transfiguration and the Garden of Gethsemane. And so they're going to be here to see how Jesus heals the daughter of Jairus. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Laughed at him in derision. They know she is dead. Don't speak like this. Let us grieve. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her. Now, when Jesus takes her by the hand, this is a corpse. Anybody who touches a corpse is ceremoniously unclean. The uncleanliness laws are going away because the ultimate thing was to show and be a symbol for how Jesus is going to save us from sin and death. And we get to see that here, how Jesus is able to go into the presence of anyone because he is God. His holiness, his perfection, and purity are coming to us, his presence, and he's able to heal us from sin, death, and the devil. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which is Aramaic, which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. 12 years, the same amount of time that the woman had that discharge of blood. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. Peter, James, and John got to see a resurrection. So all the healing, all the teaching that's happening, and all the miracles he's done, calming the storm, they got to see someone come back from the dead. Just the 3 of them, and they're told, don't tell anyone. They don't fully know what's going on. And then Jesus says, give her something to eat. The dead don't need to eat, but the living do to continue to survive. Jesus will, after the resurrection, will also ask for something to eat to show that he is living. We saw here the Lord interacting with people, and we got to see him interact with people that were unclean and prove that he is going to conquer all things, even removing the ceremoniously unclean laws to prove that the ultimate thing is that he is going to cleanse us from sin. And we see here one of the major acts that he's going to do for all of us is to raise us from the dead to life everlasting in his name. We'll pick up next time then with Mark chapter 6.